Taxi!
Where to, mate?
Hello, mate. 55 Tufton Street, please.
55 Tufton Street, SW1. Yep, I know it well. Hop in, sir. This is A Nation of Taxpayers, a weekly podcast from the Taxpayers Alliance.
On this week's episode of A Nation of Taxpayers, a podcast from the Taxpayers Alliance, you can probably hear we have left the confines of the podcast studio and we have come to glorious Southend in Essex, and I'll tell you why in a few moments' time. I'm your host, Duncan Barkes. Alongside me from the Taxpayers Alliance is Darwin Friend. Hello.
Hello, Duncan.
And also our guest this week is Philip Miller MBE, Executive Chairman of Adventure Island in Southend. Hello.
Hello, Duncan. How are you?
Very well indeed, and thank you for inviting us down. So our listener will be able to hear, this is half-term week, so we've got lots of people enjoying loads of rides here at Adventure Island, and there are so many things to talk about, Philip. First off, just give us a sense of the background to this site, because this is, well, you just celebrated your 50th anniversary, right?
Well, we're just coming up for next season. It's our 50th. I started in 1976, along with my mum, dad, and my brother. We built in those days, Southend was in the doldrums. You know, we got the world's longest pier, but the council were talking about taking it down. We pulled the illuminations down. It really was in the doldrums. And the then Peter Pan's playground, where we stood now, was in bankruptcy. So we as a family, we came here and bought it from the receiver. For about £4,000 if you go back that far.
Wow.
But you couldn't lean on the fence without it falling over. I always remember my first year here, one day off, and that was Christmas Day. I used to do the painting, the greasing, the mending, the running, and everything. We all did everything. You know, Mum used to make tea for all the staff every morning.
Really?
Yeah, it was really
so
good.
A proper family affair.
It was, yeah. And then Mum and Dad weren't particularly young when we came here, so they retired soon after. My brother didn't like the life because it's quite a Spartan existence where we work weekends and we work late, and he wanted to go and be a playboy, so that's what he did.
Yeah.
And left it to me, and I sort of built it from there, you know, bit by bit, inch by inch, and we expanded, trebled the size of what it once was. It was then those days we had about 6-7 rides, and now we've got about 36, and we've got the other side of the pier as well, which was a rundown boating pool. And so it was full of supermarket trolleys, but now it's got Rage, you know, one of the iconic roller coasters of the UK. And as a business, we're voted the best value theme park, amusement park in the UK, and we win loads of awards for customer services. We won the Queen's Award some years ago for social mobility, no less.
Yep.
Because we give everybody a chance here. You know, it doesn't matter, you know, whether you've got a qualification or not.
It's really hard to comprehend that over 50 years ago this site was, and you talked about having shopping trolleys in a pool of water somewhere, potentially selling off the iconic Southend Pier, which, if people aren't entirely sure, is the longest pleasure pier in the world. I've got that right.
That's spot on. Yeah.
So what was Southend like back then?
Well, it was a dump.
Right.
You know, I mean, the high street was good.
Yeah.
But the seafront was a dump, without any shadow of any doubt. You know, the kind of people that inhabited it wasn't families. You know, it was just drunks and, you know, people you didn't really want to associate with. Very run down.
Let's talk about where we are now. You've obviously built the business up over the last 50 plus years. What have been, and we'll talk about the current economic situation in a few moments, but just give us a sense of some of the challenges over the last several decades.
Well, surviving one government after the other. I mean, Margaret Thatcher kind of made me.
Yeah.
Because she made a climate that encouraged business and free enterprise, and I embraced it. And I've always said, she made me, Margaret Thatcher. Yeah. And we haven't really had a Conservative Prime Minister since her, really. You know, we've had Lib Dem ones with Cameron and Boris and all those ones, and Theresa Dismay. Yeah. But you know, so let's just say I've lasted this long by surviving them.
Right.
You know, it's in spite of them.
Okay, in spite of them.
Yeah.
And just for context, how many people do you employ locally?
Well, most are local. At the height of the season, we did employ up to about 1,200.
Yeah.
We've got about 400, 450 full-time people.
Yeah.
Because we've got another business along the road as well, the Sea Life Adventure. Yeah. And you know, that's where we are. I mean, locally speaking, we're probably the biggest employers, particularly for students.
Yeah, of course.
You know, they're on. They start with us when they start their further education. They stay then for 5-6 years sometimes, and some stay full time.
Right.
We've even got alumni. Yeah. You know, we've got policemen that come in as alumni. We've got teachers come as alumni.
Yeah.
You know, where they just like it so much. We've got that kind of atmosphere. I mean, they're fighting to get in. Nobody's really trying to get away, and. But this year we've had to dramatically cut back. You know, where I said our peak were 1,200. This year we're probably 700 or 800. You know, we cut so far this year 25,000 hours.
So you'll definitely have a view on the Employment Rights Bill coming down the tracks, which we'll get to a little bit later on in this particular episode. But let's just spend a little bit more time about Southend and Essex. You're a local man, born and bred. Why other people might have thought, you know what, 50 plus years ago, bit of a dump, I'll go elsewhere. You've remained loyal to this area. Why is that?
Well, I'm a Southend boy, born and bred. You know, literally, I was born in a council house. You know, proud of it, and you know, made the most of it. You know, I love the town, love the people. I've got my family, my friends here.
What's special about it?
It just gets in your blood, really. You know, you can say you can take yourself away from Southend, but you can't take Southend out of your blood, can you?
No,
and,
very true.
And you know, it's what happens. You know, well, I've seen once upon a time the council were all local people. They're born and bred much the same. They were the town fathers. You know, in the early days we still had aldermen, and they were, you know, people didn't worry about what to be voted back in, and they had civic pride. And then all of a sudden one day, wrongly so, they did away with the aldermen, and it became political. And then people started moving in from different parts of England and bringing confrontational politics. Well, we never had it. You know, we used to have council meetings with all the groups always had the town's interest first. It was never politics. It was always what was best for Southend. And that's changed vastly over the distance. Now it's quite confrontational, and the only people that really suffer are the electorate.
Let's talk about politics, Darwin. We still talk about it at the Taxpayers Alliance, the budget of 2024. Just run through some of the things so our listener remembers, and we'll get Philip's reaction to how it's impacted on his business, and then we'll look ahead to November the 26th, which is going to be the next stroke of genius, no doubt, by Chancellor Rachel Reeves. So let's just talk about the last budget. Just run through some of the things that were implemented that impacted on businesses across the United Kingdom.
Sure. Well, I think the two biggest ones that come to mind are really one that we've already mentioned, which is the employers' national insurance increase. It went from 13.8% to 15% as of April this year. And then the other thing is actually the minimum wage as well. They increased that as well. And the impacts that has on people like Philip is it actually makes it more difficult for you to employ people, because the costs of doing so grow so much more than before those policies were implemented. And the damaging thing that has on places like Southend, but also for employers across the country, is that that's going to mean fewer people in jobs. And what that means is bigger costs for the government, because those people aren't in work producing tax receipts for the government to spend on public services. They're actually going to be recipients of other people's tax receipts via benefits and other forms of income that the government provides to support them. And so I think what we've really got to worry about is those tax increases, which have already done a lot of damage. We're seeing unemployment rise. It's at a 4-year high now at 4.8%. But also we've got to worry about what you mentioned, Duncan, which is the Employment Rights Bill, because that's going to make the risks of hiring people so much greater with day one rights. And what that's going to mean really for employers is you're not going to take the risk, because if you want to try and get rid of someone, it's going to be very difficult and very costly for your business, which given the current economic environment, you're just not going to do.
I remember quite clearly last year sitting around the big TV in 55 Tufton Street as we all watched the budget unfold and almost weeping in despair. Philip, what was your immediate reaction after Rachel Reeves' announcement last year?
Well, it took a while to sink in, but straight off we had a war council, with my family, and we said, right, we've got to cut a cloth accordingly. So straight away we just made the decision. There's full-time staff left. We didn't replace them, and we haven't. I think we're up to about 16 full-time jobs that have gone since then, and they're still every now and again. We just feel like make up the void. We all do it extra. When it came to all the students that we employ, we just cut their hours dramatically. There's probably the equivalent of maybe 250, 300 jobs gone. And I mean, it's amazing. This year, in particular, we've had 12 to 1,400 people on the waiting list, students, just for an interview. Forget about getting a job, just for an interview. So you imagine all these poor kids where they normally would be working. We never had like that in the past. It was always here. We actually was looking for staff all the time, but now there's an abundance of them, and so where are they going to get this money from?
I mean, I think the thing that we always have had now for the last 10 years almost, I would say, is we've had politicians in Westminster say they want to level up the country. They want to do that all the time. And I appreciate the kind of language and the reasons why they want to do that. But I feel like the only way they think they can do that ever is by spending more taxpayers' money.
Yeah.
And actually what you need to think about is when they're taxing people more, when they're spending more, when they're borrowing more, that's actually austerity on taxpayers. And so if they want to actually try and level people up, Philip said he's had to make difficult decisions about employing people on a part-time basis, and I'm sure on a full-time basis as well in the future. Well, actually, if you want to level up places such as Southend, what you can actually do is make that tax and regulatory environment easier on people like Philip to enable him to give people those opportunities rather than constantly feed the government machine of we have to spend more money in order to try and make people's lives better. Let's cut taxes first.
We're recording this with less than 4 weeks to go before the budget on November the 26th. Darwin, what do we know about potentially some of the speculation so far as to what Rachel Reeves may announce?
Well, the big one that we've been hearing recently is on income tax. So there's been talk about either an income tax rise, so actually increasing potentially the basic rate of income tax, or alternatively freezing income tax thresholds. Now, the reason why both of those things are damaging is we're already going to be facing a record high post-war tax burden as of April next year as a result of what this government did last year. But also it's damaging because what the freezing of tax thresholds does is it forces more and more people into paying higher levels of income tax. Now, we've had frozen tax thresholds for several years already. It's meant to go on for several years more, and the talk is that they could extend that for another 2 years into the 2030s. So that's going to bring us almost to 10 years of frozen tax thresholds, which is simply unfair. I mean, we're talking about some of the poorest people having to pay tax when they're earning, £12,500. I don't think by many people's measures that's a lot of money. And what we should be doing is indexing tax rates, or tax thresholds I should say, to inflation so that then people aren't being forced into it. But ultimately the reason why we're going to be facing all of these tax rises is because the government's unable to control spending. We saw earlier this year they tried to implement some spending cuts by means testing the winter fuel payments, for example, and their backbenchers just wouldn't have it. And until the government gets a grip on spending, unfortunately it's just going to be more bad news for people such as Philip, but for taxpayers across the country, because their taxes are going to rise because Rachel can't get control of spending.
Philip, you explained earlier the impact to your business of the last budget. What do you want to see in here from Rachel Reeves in November, and what should she be doing to support businesses?
Well, she should make life easier for us as much as possible, because it's only business that creates the growth. We're the only ones that create the wealth. The governments don't create any wealth. Councils don't create any wealth. And, they should... I mean, if you put it in simple terms, if you gave the government £1,000 and you gave me £1,000 and you came back a few months later, who would have made a profit on that £1,000? And that's as simple. It's just two columns, isn't it? It's just common sense. So... lower taxes create more taxes. There's no ifs or buts or two ways around it. It's as simple as that. Just I think there's a guy called Laffer, isn't there?
Yeah.
He's got the Laffer curve. He's got his curve. I mean, I'm not an economist. I'm not anything, but just a businessman. But even guys like that, why don't they listen to them? What's wrong with listening to those people? They've got far more expertise than that. I mean, in fairness, I wouldn't give Rachel Reeves a job as my finance director here.
What about running that ride over there, though? Would you trust her with that?
I'll put her in charge of the ladies' toilets. I think she might be able to manage that, But that's about as far as I could go. So
the one thing that you would like to see announced in the budget that would instantaneously make your life as a businessman easier, what would it be?
Lower taxes. The easiest one for us would be to start lowering VAT. It's so unfair. Everybody spends £1 on here. The best part of 20p go straight to the government. I mean, it's like being run by the mafia, isn't it? They've got a bit, their nose in the trough of every single penny that's taken and spent by everybody, and they still can't make it pay. Imagine having a business like the government, and you're still making huge losses. I mean, I can't work it out. I mean, it's hard enough to run a business. I think I could run the country far more profitably than that lot put together, just by using normal business practices. Just two columns: money in, money out. Make sure you've got more coming in than going out. Watch your expenses, maximise your profits. So, as you can probably hear, we've come inside for a little bit of peace and quiet. You can still hear outside the joyful screams of people on various rides here at Adventure Island. And we've come inside for a couple of reasons. We're going to talk politics.
with a very local Essex slant. Now, you may be aware that in 2026 there's going to be some mayoral elections taking place in places like Kent and Sussex and Hampshire and here in Essex, and as far as we know at the moment, potentially some elections for councillors, though there is some, I think it's fair to say there's a question mark over whether or not that's going ahead. We're going to talk about the mayoral elections because Philip is going to stand as a candidate, so we'll find out his motivation for doing so and some of his reasons. But let's just get a view on where we would be democratically as a country if the councillor elections do not go ahead. Darwin, what can you tell us?
Yeah, so kind of this is part of a wider package of reforms that the government wanted to bring in both mayoral authorities, but also to potentially get rid of some district authorities and create new, larger unitary authorities, which effectively abolishes, let's say, 8 councils and then replaces it with 1 council. So Taxpayers Alliance has before done research that in certain circumstances those are actually good efficiencies for taxpayers and deliver savings and better value for money than the current system. But the issue we've had is since the government announced the local elections for councils last year were delayed because they wanted to be more time before the implementation happened. But now subsequently to that, even though the elections were meant to happen in April of 2026 following that delay, it now looks like there could be yet a further delay. We're seeing lots of councils actually asking the government to delay these elections again into April of 2027 or May of 2027. And the concern with that is the fact that a lot of these councils haven't had elections since 2021, 2022. Yeah. Now, normally election cycles for councils are 4 years, and how they do the elections during that period varies. But 4 years, that's a normal democratic accountability time frame. That's going to be 6 years potentially now, or it could be delayed even further. And so I think from a taxpayer point of view, outside of the cost of the local elections, I think frankly it's just a pure democratic point that we need to have local accountability for councillors because they're the people delivering local services, whether it be waste collection or fixing roads, fixing potholes. And frankly, I think a lot has changed since 2021, 2022, and so the government needs to get on and either have this reform happen or they need to maintain the current system. They just need to get on so that then we can have elections and councillors can be held to account.
Excellent. Let's talk about the mayoral elections that we, as far as we know, when we're recording this podcast, are still going ahead. I mentioned earlier mayoral elections in Hampshire and Sussex and Kent and here in Essex. Philip, you've taken, some might say, the brave decision to stand as a candidate, and there's so many things to discuss with you behind that decision. You're a successful local businessman. You could sit here behind your desk at Adventure Island and do what most of us do elsewhere behind our desks and have a moan about the state of the country, but you're doing more than most of us would do. You're planning to make a difference. The obvious question is why?
Well, I was approached by somebody I respect, and he said, would you like to think about standing for Mayor of Essex? And I'm not far from a politician. I'm a PC person you're ever going to meet. Right. But he said, no, you're exactly the kind of person that should do well. He said, and he also offered to run the campaign for me, which is absolutely fine. He's quite adept at those things. He's did similar for other people. So I got a group of my friends together who I've christened Dad's Army, and so we've got our committee. And I've got an expert on the police who used to be a divisional commander. I've got an expert architect. An award-winning architect at that. I've got a fantastic numbers guy, Bill, who's used to be my auditor, accountant, who's just retired. And I've got a couple of other people in the wings to come in as well. And so between us all, we've got probably hundreds of years of experience on management and building businesses and all these and how to do them. And we feel that it's got a chance. But the reason I've taken it on, and I'm not, as I say, it's not a life's ambition to be a politician. That's the last thing I ever wanted to be. It's just I was just mad as hell, and I'm not going to take it anymore. I've just watched them wreck the country, wreck the councils for years and years, and I just want to see if I can go. I've always said I could run it much better than they could. I feel I could do it, 1 day a week better than they could do all year, and I just feel that I just want to have a go and have my say and show them how it should be done.
Tell me in a bit more detail about that delicious phrase you've just used, your dad's army. So I have this mental image now of, I'm presuming the majority are gentlemen, but I don't know, sitting around a table, maybe with a cup of coffee, cup of tea, or maybe a couple of glasses of beer or a bottle of wine or whatever, putting the world to rights, but actually using their real-life experience, having run businesses, organisations, worked in the police or whatever. They go, do you know what? We know how to make this work. Is that? Have I painted a picture that's correct?
I think you hit the nail bang on the head. We're also recruiting a woman or two, just to make it even, and ones have got a view of the world, got some experience, so we get the balance. And we've got a couple of young ones who are interested as well. So we're going to get everybody's viewpoints. It's not all just us, is it?
No.
But at the end of the day, to me, it's all about money. People just can't afford what's going on at the moment. Every year, our council tax go up, and the civic centre people pay themselves more and more. They don't have to worry about arguing whether they can afford the pay rise or whether they can afford their gold-plated pensions. They just get it automatically. And as a resident, we just get less and less. Our bins aren't even emptied any week anymore, and the potholes aren't filled in, and the town's getting tattier and tattier, but they're getting richer and richer.
It's almost like you have a shadow cabinet ready and raring to go, which is fantastic. So let's just go through some of the areas that I think our listener will be interested in. And it's important to point out that you're standing as an independent. You're not affiliated to a political party. And I might ask you a little bit later on, before we wrap this up, why you've decided to stand as an independent as opposed to bolt yourself on or stand under a political party's name. We'll get to that later. But let's talk about the issues. Let's talk about law and order. What's your stance on that?
What I want is a police force, not a police service. And I want proper policemen doing proper policing things without the fear of some jumped up politician picking on them and getting them out their jobs because they haven't observed this thug's human rights. I've stood in this seafront for so many years, and I've watched it change. Where once upon a time there could be some trouble, a couple of policemen would turn up and it all just dissolve. Now they're just as liable to be attacked as helped, and they put their phones in their faces. If somebody put a phone in my face, I'll punch it away. So why on earth should I put up with that? So why should these poor old policemen? They need help. They need backup. And I've got the guy who can do it. He used to be their boss, 10 years ago, and he was a policeman's policeman. And with a bit of luck, he'll be the man in charge of the policemen.
Just talking about law and order, we're recording this in your office at Southend. I mean, quite a few of our listeners will be aware of the footage that appeared online a couple of years ago, I think, inside the last 2 years, of I think it was literally round the corner from here, a machete fight between some gang members. Yeah. Is that the kind of thing that worries you in this part of Essex or in Essex as a whole?
Oh, that always worries you, but that was a one-off. It was an arranged fight for these thugs from London that didn't want to do it in London because they were worried about getting arrested. They thought our policemen were actually soft. They found out they're not so soft and finished up getting arrested and doing time for it, thank goodness. And also the media at the time made it far, far worse than what it really was. It wasn't a good look, but they showed it on the TV. I mean, I did a TV interview with Nigel Farage of all people, who I thought was a bit of a friend because I was a Brexit guy, and he had this. He went straight away. So from Southport to Southend, well, we all know what went on in Southport, and it was no comparison to what was happening in Southend. And he showed this picture the whole time I was being interviewed of these running youths, and that was what people didn't realise was that was at night time, and they were running for their last train. And the chief superintendent confirmed that to me. And the actual machete incident was actually during the day, and it was just a flash in the pan. Nobody actually got hurt, nobody actually got hit, and they ran off and carried on up the high street somewhere. But it was a terrifying look. But we've got a really safe seafront. We've got a permanent police station along here, and it keeps a lid on it. We've got our own security. We've got CCTV cameras. We've got vehicle recognition things. We work with the local railway lines. Very few can get through or get away with anything here.
Yeah. So if you're successful and become the Mayor of Essex, you've outlined where your stance is on law and order. It is going back to what I would describe as good old-fashioned policing, as a police force, not a police service. Let's move it on from law and order a little bit. Let's talk about something that is running through your veins. What would you do for local businesses right across Essex?
Well, the first thing I'll do, I'll put free parking in all the high streets and seafronts for 2 hours. Because at the moment, it's a war on motorists. I mean, Southend in particular, we've got the most expensive car parking for seasides in the whole of the UK. And it does put people off, there's no doubt about it. And the council think that's okay because that allows them to pay themselves more money, pay themselves more pensions, and they think they're clever guys. They think councils should really stick to council things. They should run the schools, run the refuse, run the gardens. Yeah. They're not business people. But when they get OPM, other people's money. They get carried away, and they start thinking of themselves as tycoons. I mean, this lot here in Southend, they went and brought a shopping centre that nobody wanted.
Right.
It was a run-down one for something like 12 million quid. Yeah. Forgot to have a survey, so they spent another 4 million quid, and it just got worse. And they look at that as a success. Yeah. Go to Thurrock and see what happens. Well, everybody knows what happens at Thurrock. Basildon is no better, and it's all over the county. So I just want to stop councils doing stupid things and just sticking to what they're supposed to be there for, no more than that.
Yeah, give me your thoughts on this, because you've pushed a button for me here. I've never understood it. It's so obvious to anyone with a brain, right? When you hear these politicians wanging on about the high street dying and people aren't going to certain places to shop or whatever, they're the same councillors who 9 times out of 10 have voted through a parking increase or parking charges in a car park, right? You don't need to be the sharpest tool in the box to realise if you give people a couple of hours free parking, they will come to that area, they will revitalise the high street, they will support local businesses. There's a ripple effect to the local economy. Yet none of these people who get elected into office seem to see it. Why is that, do you think?
Well, first off, if you go to the shopping centres, Lakeside or Blue Water, which are around, it's free parking.
Yeah.
I mean, these are the experts. Why are they doing that? So if they were actually serious about revitalising the high streets instead of just paying lip service, that would be the first thing they do, because we are in the age of the motor car, whether you like it or not.
Yeah.
And then it's as simple as that. Until they invent something else to replace it, that's what we've got. Cars are oxygen to businesses. That is it. And they're doing everything in their power to put them off. They make it harder and harder to get into towns with traffic systems and traffic lights and God knows what else. And when they get here, they're stung through the nose. So would you go back?
No.
And businesses rely on footfall and regular customers. And they're being undermined before they start. There's lots of things you can do to high streets. That's the key one, of course. There's loads of things you could do, but they don't listen.
Okay, so we've covered off business, commerce, law and order. You're running to be Mayor of Essex as an independent candidate. The good people of this county vote you in. In your first 100 days, what are the things that you would like to achieve?
I'd like to cut, so we can start putting council tax down. That'll be the target, to reduce it and keep reducing it. Obviously, we've got to cut a lot of staff because there are far too many staff to start with. And what we've got an abundance of chief officers in particular that are actually underworked, underbrained and overpaid. And, in Southend alone, we've got 23 chief officers that probably average about £150,000 a piece each, and they probably get another 30% on top of this gold-plated convention that we're all paying for.
Yeah.
We have to pay for our own, but it seems wrong. We've got to pay for our own, then we've got to pay for theirs as well, and we can't afford it. So, to me, we've got to have a complete cull. We've got to take them all out, save that money, and then put people in there who've been business people elsewhere, and those people would work for far less and do a far, far better job. And the other thing, they'll actually be in the office rather than working from home somewhere, pretending to be here. And also, I think what you want, to get some local loyalty out of it, you want people from the area. You don't want to be bringing people in from, like they get these hard guns. They come in, they get it on their CV, and they go off somewhere else, and they get a payoff before they go. Once upon a time in Southend, the rule were, if you were a senior officer, you had to live within the environs of Southend. Not anymore. And because they've got no civic pride, have they? If you're living in the town, you want the town as nice as you can make it, as safe as you can make it, as brilliantly educated as you can make it, all those things, isn't it? But they don't care because they're hard guns.
Darwin, just very quickly, let me bring you in on this, because Philip made a really interesting point there about the excessive salaries that some council officers are on. That's before you get into the incredibly generous pensions. It's always struck me as bizarre, and this is meat and drink for the Taxpayers Alliance, that you have some of these officers on a salary akin to our Prime Minister.
Yeah, well, actually, in a lot of cases now, more than the Prime Minister. This is the thing, and quite often the defenders of it say, well, how are you meant to get these people in? Like, if you want to have a good local area, then you need to give them a good salary. And I think people like me and people such as Philip as well would say, yep, absolutely fair play to that, but we're not getting that. Like, good salaries should be paid to people who are delivering a good job. And the issue that we've had recently, as Philip mentioned, is we're actually seeing service levels drop. They're not getting better, they're getting worse. And people such as chief officers are living outside of the areas. And these are kind of simple things that should be pretty much understood by everybody that if you live in the local area, you're going to care about the local area. If you do a good job, you'll get paid a good salary as well. But the issue that we have now is we seem to have this kind of culture whereby no matter how good a job or not you're doing, you are automatically deserving of a massive salary more than the Prime Minister. And frankly, when we're talking about local authorities, you sometimes hear about sort of like, oh, they've got so much responsibility on their shoulders. They're responsible for an entire council. Well, I'm sorry, but the Prime Minister is responsible for an entire country and making life and death decisions for many people in this country in the armed services, for example. And so the idea that these council bosses, when they're not even delivering a good quality local service for local residents, should be getting paid more than him is frankly ridiculous. And I mean, we do research every year. It's called our Town Hall Rich List. We release it pretty much every April every year. And what we've seen in recent years is just the number of people earning six figures is going up and up and up. Last year's report showed that I think there was 3,906 people or something around that level who were receiving over £100,000 in total remuneration in councils across the country. And that's just going up and up. We're seeing people earn over 150,000, record amounts of that, over £200,000 more than that. These are people in the top 1% of income earners across the country. And I think the simple rule needs to be that if you're delivering a good service, you should be getting good pay. But when you're not, we need to potentially get rid of those people and actually bring in people who could deliver a better service for local residents.
Philip, a final few words from you. You've announced that you're going to stand as the independent candidate or an independent candidate for Essex. Obviously, campaigning will start to build up. What can the people of this county expect to see and hear from you over the next few months?
A safer county, obviously, to give the police, police powers.
Yep.
That's to me the priority number one. To start getting more for their money and paying less for it. For two, that would be my two main ambitions. I mean, everybody wants everything. We just can't afford everything. That's the problem. Now, I think everybody's got to understand you've got to cut your cloth accordingly. There's many subjects where if you got me onto council waste, just this council, and if you multiply that throughout Essex, it doesn't get any better. It gets worse in some instances. And just cutting the waste and getting decent people that understand it's not their money. I'm on various committees for charities and I'm looking after other people's money. I'm 10 times more careful with that than I am with my own because it's not my money. But when it's your own, you can, if you want to waste it, you can, can't you? But when it's other people's, you've got to be far more vigilant. And these people, they're profligate. They don't care.
Yeah. And I hinted at this earlier. You're running as an independent. People listening might go, well, why not? I mean, I'm sure you've had conversations in the past. You don't have to disclose them. But, there'll be political parties you could run under their banner. Why have you chosen to stand as an independent?
Because I want to have my say. I don't want to be governed. I mean, I have great respect for actually Kemi Baddenhall. I think she's, she could be the next Margaret Thatcher. And, as I said, I'm an old Thatcherite. But I don't want to be governed by political agendas. Oh, no, you can't say this, you can't say that. Oh, no, because that'll upset somebody. I'm just doing it on a business basis. My company is silent. I speak for my company, and that's how it works. And the health of the company must always come first. And so, when you're an elected official, it's not about what you want; it's what the county wants in this instance. What's the best for the health of the people? They're the people who voted for you. They're the people that pay the bills. What's the best for them? If you're, it's what we mentioned earlier about levelling up. Essex should keep its own money and spend on its own infrastructure because we're in gridlock. It's no good living in a nice county if you can't get round it. And that's our biggest problem. We spend all our money up north and everywhere else to level up. That's got to stop. And they're the things that I think, I want to be able to... But I know, already speaking to politicians, that if I said that as a Tory or anybody else, oh no, you can't say that because we've got voters somewhere up north that might get upset. Well, I don't care about up north. I don't give a flying fart about monkeys about up north. I'm worried about here. I'm selfish. I'm like Trump of Essex. Let's put our needs before others.
Mega.
It's
mega, isn't it?
Yeah, make Essex great again.
Listen, Philip, it's been an absolute joy. Thank you for inviting us here to Adventure Island.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you so much. Darwin, thank you as well.
Thank you very much, Duncan.
This has been A Nation of Taxpayers, the podcast from the Taxpayers Alliance, out of the studio this week, recording live in Southend and Essex. If you'd like to drop us an email about anything you've heard, the email address is podcast@taxpayersalliance.com. You can find an archive of past episodes going back over a year now on Apple Podcasts and on Spotify and on YouTube. Please spread the word. I'm Duncan Barkes, I've been your host, and as always, thank you for listening.